The morning of February 8, 1945 found the men of 2nd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, trapped in the Schönberg Valley
Look at the
along the
flag.
French-German border,
That's not
like
Tiger.
rats in a steel
It's
cage.
airborne.
Three
We need to
Tiger II
quarantine the
tanks, the
area
most
immediately.
feared armor in the Wehrmacht arsenal, blocked the only pass through the mountains. Their 80mm guns commanded every approach, every ridge, every desperate path to freedom. In 2 days, 47 American soldiers had died trying to break through. Now ammunition running low, medical supplies exhausted, and reinforcements impossible, the remaining 200 men waited for either miracle or death. Staff Sergeant Thomas Garrett pressed his back against the frozen earth of a shell crater and tried to steady his breathing. At 24 years old, he had the hands of a watchmaker, because that is exactly what he had been before the war swept him from his workshop in Topeka, Kansas, to this frozen hell 6,000 miles from home. Those hands trained since age 15 to assemble watch movements in near darkness, to feel the difference between a wheel out of alignment by thousandths of an inch, now gripped a Springfield M1034 rifle with no scope. The original had shattered 3 days ago when shrapnel from a German 88 turned his position into a tornado of steel and dirt. The irony was not lost on him. He had been assigned as a marksman not because of any particular skill with a rifle, but because the company was short on men, and someone noticed he had steady hands and good eyes. In Kansas, he had used those eyes to spot imperfections in gear trains, smaller than rice grains. Here he was expected to use them to spot Germans at 300 yards through iron sights designed in 1903. It was like asking a surgeon to operate with a butter knife. Colonel William Hartley stood in what remained of the battalion command post, a glorified hole in the ground, covered with logs and frozen mud, staring at a map that might as well have been a death certificate. The radio operator, a 19-year-old kid from Ohio named Peterson, had just decoded the message from division: breakthrough within 48 hours, or consider surrender to prevent further casualties. Hartley crumpled the message and threw it into the corner. Surrender was not a word in his vocabulary. He had fought in North Africa, Sicily, and Anzio. He would not be the officer who gave up in some nameless valley in France. But mathematics did not lie. 3 Tiger II tanks with armor up to 180 pounds thick on the turret front. The best anti-tank weapon the battalion possessed was a handful of bazookas with an effective range of 100 yards against side armor. To get that close meant crossing 400 yards of open ground under direct fire from the most powerful tank gun in existence. The math was simple suicide. Hartley made his decision. They would attack at dawn on February 10th. Every man who could hold a weapon would charge simultaneously from 3 directions. Maybe in the chaos, some would get through. Some was better than none. He called his company commanders together to give what everyone knew would be final orders. Among them was Lieutenant David Chen, commanding what was left of Able Company down to 38 men from an original strength of 140. Chen listened to the plan with the expression of a man hearing his own death sentence read aloud. When Hartley finished, Chen asked the question everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to voice. "Sir, what about trying to flank through the high ground at night?" Hartley shook his head. "We tried that. Lost 12 men to mines and machine gun nests. The Germans have every approach covered." "Then this is not an attack," Chen said quietly. "It is an execution." Hartley met his eyes. "It is what we have, Lieutenant. Make sure your men are ready." That evening, as darkness settled over the valley like a burial shroud, Tom Garrett and Corporal Frank Morrison crawled out of their position for a reconnaissance patrol. Morrison, a former auto mechanic from Detroit, had volunteered to go with Tom because, as he put it, he would rather die doing something than die waiting to do something. They moved through the destroyed forest trees, splintered into wooden stakes, the ground cratered like the surface of the moon. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and their breath came out in small clouds that they tried to suppress fearing German observers. About 300 yards from their line, they discovered something unexpected: an abandoned German field hospital hastily evacuated when the Wehrmacht pulled back to consolidate around the Tigers. Medical equipment lay scattered across the frozen ground, bandages fluttering in the wind like surrender flags. Most of it was useless or destroyed, but in a corner, somehow intact despite the chaos, sat a Carl Zeiss Gina microscope, its brass fittings tarnished, but its lenses unbroken. Morrison started to move past it, but Tom stopped. He knelt beside the microscope, his watchmaker instincts immediately recognizing quality optics. The main objective lens was a 40x magnification piece coated with the anti-reflective treatment Zeiss was famous for. The tube was solid brass, precisely machined. The adjustment knob still moved smoothly despite the cold. "What are you doing?" Morrison whispered. "We need to go." Tom carefully lifted the microscope, feeling its weight examining the lens assembly. "This could work. Work for what you planning to study German bacteria." Tom looked at his rifle, then at the microscope, then back at his rifle. In his mind, gears were already turning, not the gears of a watch, but the gears of possibility. "I can make a scope out of this." Morrison stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Tom, this is not the time to play inventor." But Tom was already dismantling the microscope with the quick, precise movements of someone who had taken apart 1,000 mechanisms. He removed the objective lens, the tube assembly, the prism housing. Each piece went into his pack with the care of a mother handling a newborn. They made it back to their lines just before midnight. Tom immediately went to work in an abandoned ammunition bunker, using it as a makeshift workshop. By the light of a single candle, he spread out the microscope parts and began to plan. He needed mounting rings to attach it to his rifle. He needed a way to create crosshairs. He needed to align the optics precisely, or the whole thing would be useless. Lieutenant Chen found him there at 200 hours still working. "Garrett, what the hell are you doing?" Tom did not look up from his work. "Making a scope, sir." Chen picked up one of the lens pieces, examined it with disgust. "This is not your workshop in Kansas, Sergeant. This is not some pocket watch you can tinker with. We attack in 30 hours and you are playing with toys?" "With respect, sir, charging those tigers with rifles is suicide. But if I could hit something specific from a distance, maybe create enough chaos to give the attack a chance." Chen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can stop a tiger tank with a rifle? Even with a real scope, which this is not, you would need an anti-tank rifle. What we have are 30 caliber rounds that will bounce off that armor like spitballs." Tom finally looked up, and Chen saw something in his eyes, not desperation, but calculation, the look of a man solving a problem rather than accepting defeat. "I do not need to penetrate the armor, sir. Every machine has vulnerable points. Optics, ventilation systems, external fuel tanks. The Tigers carry 200-liter auxiliary fuel drums on their rear deck. One incendiary round in the right place. You are talking about a shot from what distance those Tigers are positioned, over 1,000 yards from any position we could reach. 1,100 yards, sir. I have been watching them for 2 days. Every morning at 600 hours, they open their engine hatches for cooling. The crew often dismounts to smoke. They feel safe because they know we cannot reach them." Chen set down the lens piece. For a moment, he seemed to consider the possibility, then shook his head. "This is madness, Garrett. I should report you to Hartley for wasting resources and time. Give me one chance, sir. Tomorrow morning. If I fail, you can report me for anything you want. Court-martial me for destroying military property, for dereliction of duty, for whatever regulation I am breaking. But if there is even a small chance this could help save some of our men." Chen was quiet for a long moment. Outside, they could hear the distant rumble of German vehicles, probably bringing more supplies to the Tigers. Finally, he spoke. "You have until dawn tomorrow to make this thing work. One shot, Garrett. If you miss, or if this contraption falls apart when you fire, I will personally see you brought up on charges. If by some miracle you succeed, I will forget I ever saw this." After Chen left, Tom returned to his work with renewed urgency. Morrison found him there an hour later, still assembling pieces by candlelight. "Tom, Chen told me what you were trying to do. This is crazy." Tom did not stop working. "Crazy as charging those tanks across open ground." Morrison watched him for a moment, then sat down beside him. "What do you need?" For the first time in hours, Tom smiled slightly. "I need mounting rings. Check the destroyed German 88 near the south perimeter. The shell casings have steel rings that might work. I need wire for crosshairs, the thinner the better. And I need someone who understands angles and wind drift." Morrison stood up. "I will get the rings. Rodriguez knows ballistics. His father was a hunter in Mexico, taught him to shoot at distance with iron sights. I will find him." By 400 hours, Tom had assembled his first prototype. Using the microscope tube as a scope body, He had mounted the 40x objective lens at the front and a 10x eyepiece at the rear, giving him roughly 4x magnification when properly focused. The mounting rings fashioned from German shell casings were crude but solid. For crosshairs, he had stretched field telephone wire across the reticle plane, creating a simple cross pattern. The entire assembly looked like something a child might build from spare parts. But when Tom held it up to his eye and looked through it at a distant tree line, illuminated by moonlight, he could see individual branches at 300 yards. Corporal Carlos Rodriguez arrived just as Tom was attempting to mount the scope on his rifle. Rodriguez was a small, quiet man from Texas whose father had indeed been a hunter in Chihuahua, Mexico, before immigrating to America. He took one look at the improvised scope and whistled low. "That is either the ugliest or the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Tom managed to secure the scope to his rifle using wire and improvised clamps. It sat high and looked awkward, like a telescope had mated with a rifle and produced an ungainly offspring. But when he shouldered the weapon and looked through the optics, the image was clear, magnified, usable. Rodriguez helped him carry the rifle outside for a test. They moved to a concealed position overlooking a destroyed German half-track about 200 yards away. Tom settled into a prone position, trying to get comfortable with the unusual weight distribution of the rifle. The scope was heavy, making the weapon front heavy. He would need to compensate. "Wind is maybe 3 miles per hour from the northwest," Rodriguez whispered. "At 200 yards, negligible drift." Tom centered the crosshairs on a specific bolt on the half-track's wheel assembly, a target no bigger than a quarter. He controlled his breathing, felt his heart beat slow, found that moment of stillness between breaths that watchmakers use when placing delicate parts. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the scope, Tom saw a spark where the bolt had been. Direct hit. Rodriguez grinned. "Mother of God, it works." But 200 yards was not 1,100 yards. The real test would come in the morning against a real target with lives hanging in the balance. Tom spent the remaining hours until dawn, fine-tuning the scope, reinforcing the mounts, memorizing the feel of the weapon. He studied his target area through binoculars, calculating angles, measuring wind patterns using smoke from destroyed vehicles. At 05:30 hours, February 9th, as the eastern sky began to lighten, Tom was in position. He had chosen a shell crater on elevated ground that gave him a clear line of sight to the lead Tiger II. The range was exactly what he had calculated, 1,100 yards. The temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind was 5 miles per hour from the northwest. He would need to aim approximately 18 inches left of his target to compensate for drift and significantly high to account for bullet drop at that extreme range. Morrison lay beside him with binoculars serving as his spotter. Rodriguez was to his left, watching their flanks. All three knew that once Tom fired, if he fired, their position would be revealed. They had planned an escape route, but all understood it was more hope than plan. Through his improvised scope, Tom could see the Tiger II clearly. It sat like a metal mountain, impossibly huge, impossibly powerful. The auxiliary fuel drum was visible on the rear deck exactly where he expected it, but the crew had not yet emerged for their morning ritual. Then disaster struck. The scope began to fog from the temperature difference between the cold morning air and Tom's warm breath. The image became cloudy, indistinct. Tom pulled back frantically, trying to clear the lens with his sleeve, but it only made it worse. "Problem," Morrison whispered. "Fogging. I cannot see clearly." Rodriguez reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tin. "Soap," he said. "My mother sent it. Rub a thin film on the lens, then wipe it almost clean. Old hunter trick." With shaking hands, knowing that dawn was breaking and time was running out, Tom applied the soap film to both lenses, then carefully wiped them with a clean cloth. When he looked through the scope again, the image was clear, perhaps even clearer than before. At 05:55 hours, the engine hatch on the lead Tiger II opened. Steam rose into the cold morning air. Tom watched through his scope as a crew member, probably the driver, climbed out to check something in the engine compartment. Another crew member joined him. They were talking, gesturing, unaware that 1,100 yards away, a watchmaker from Kansas was centering crosshairs on the fuel drum just feet from where they stood. Tom made his final calculations. The bullet would take approximately 3.2 seconds to travel the distance. In that time, the wind could push it several feet off course. He needed to aim high to account for drop left, to account for wind, and pray that his improvised scope held zero through the shot. Morrison whispered, "Two more crew members coming out. They are lighting cigarettes." Four German tankers feeling completely safe, protected by distance and armor, and the certainty that American infantry could not touch them. They were about to learn otherwise. Tom found his breathing rhythm, in through the nose, hold out through the mouth. His heartbeat slowed. The world narrowed to the view through his scope. The crosshairs made from field telephone wire settled on a point 18 inches left and 24 inches above the auxiliary fuel drum. He began to squeeze the trigger, not pulling, but squeezing with steady, even pressure, just as he would turn the crown on a watch, smooth and controlled. The moment stretched. Time dilated. Tom existed in that space between heartbeats, between breaths, between thought and action. Everything he had learned in 24 years, every skill from the watch shop, every moment of training, every calculation compressed into this single instant. The trigger broke clean at 4.5 pounds of pressure. The rifle fired. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, spinning through the cold morning air on a trajectory that would determine whether 200 American soldiers lived or died. Tom held his position, watching through the fogged edges of his makeshift scope as 3.2 seconds stretched into eternity. Then impact. Not an explosion, not yet, just a spark where the steel core bullet punched through the auxiliary fuel drum. For a heartbeat, nothing. The German tankers continued their conversation unaware. Then fuel began to leak, splashing onto the hot engine manifold below. Fire bloomed like a deadly flower, orange and angry in the gray dawn. One of the tankers shouted, pointing at the spreading flames. They scrambled for fire extinguishers, but the fuel was already cascading into the open engine compartment. Tom watched through his scope as panic replaced confidence on their faces. The fire reached the ammunition stored in the turret bustle. The first explosion was muffled, contained within the armor, but Tom knew what came next. He grabbed Morrison and Rodriguez, pulling them down into the crater just as the Tiger II's ammunition cooked off completely. The explosion shook the earth. The turret, weighing 12 tons, launched skyward like a child's toy, spinning end over end before crashing down 40 yards away. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder echoing off the mountains, impossible to ignore. Every German position, every American foxhole, everyone stopped and stared at the pillar of black smoke rising from what had been an invincible fortress of steel. Morrison lifted his head, eyes wide with disbelief. "You did it. You actually did it." But Tom was already moving, breaking down his rifle, preparing to relocate. "We need to move. Now!" They crawled through the destroyed forest as German artillery began to rain down on their former position. Behind them, confusion reigned in the German lines. Radio traffic, intercepted later by American intelligence, revealed panic among the remaining Tiger crews. Was it artillery airstrike? Some new American weapon? No one had seen the muzzle flash from 1,100 yards away. No one could believe a single rifle had done this. They reached the American lines just as Lieutenant Chen was briefing what remained of Able Company for the next morning's suicidal assault. Chen stopped mid-sentence when he saw Tom, Morrison, and Rodriguez crawl into the command post covered in dirt and powder burns. "Was that you?" Chen asked, though he already knew the answer. Tom nodded, setting down his rifle with its absurd scope still attached. "One Tiger down, sir. 2 remaining." Chen stared at him for a long moment, then did something no one expected. He laughed. Not the bitter laugh from the night before, but genuine, amazed laughter. "You magnificent bastard. You actually did it." Word spread through the battalion within minutes. The watchmaker had killed a tiger with a homemade scope. Soldiers who had been preparing to die suddenly had something they had not possessed in days' hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would not have to charge into certain death after all. Colonel Hartley summoned Tom immediately. The battalion commander looked older than his 45 years, gray stubble on his cheeks, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and impossible decisions. He examined Tom's rifle with the mixture of skepticism and wonder usually reserved for religious artifacts. "Sergeant Garrett explained to me exactly what I'm looking at." Tom detailed the construction, the German microscope, the improvised mounting system, the calculation required for the shot. Hartley listened without interruption, occasionally glancing through the scope himself. When Tom finished, Hartley set the rifle down carefully. "Can you do it again?" "Sir, the Germans will not make the same mistake." They will keep hatches closed, move the auxiliary fuel drums, possibly relocate entirely. That was not my question, Sergeant. Can you do it again? Tom met his eyes. Give me tonight to improve the scope, sir. The mounting is loose from the recoil. The crosshairs need adjustment. But yes, I can do it again. Hartley made a decision that would have horrified his superiors. He postponed the morning attack by 24 hours, citing the need to wait for promised reinforcements that both he and division knew were not coming. It bought Tom one day to perfect his weapon and find another miracle. That night, Tom worked with desperate intensity. Rodriguez had become his assistant, using his understanding of ballistics to help Tom create a ranging system. They etched marks on the scope tube corresponding to different distances, using destroyed vehicles at known ranges as reference points. Morrison scavenged materials from across the battlefield, including springs from a destroyed German motorcycle that Tom used to create a shock absorption system for the scope mount. The work was interrupted near midnight by incoming intelligence that made their situation even more desperate. Sergeant James Wallace, who spoke fluent German, thanks to grandparents from Bavaria, had been monitoring enemy radio traffic. He rushed into Tom's makeshift workshop with news that changed everything. 2 more Tiger IIs arriving at dawn. The Germans are reinforcing the position. 5 Tiger tanks against 200 exhausted infantrymen. The math had gone from suicidal to impossible. Even if Tom could repeat his miracle, he could not stop 5 Tigers with a rifle. But Rodriguez had an idea. His father had not just been a hunter in Chihuahua. He had been a guerrilla fighter during the Revolution, using tricks and deception to fight forces 10 times his strength. We do not need to destroy all 5 Tigers, Rodriguez said. We need to make them think we can destroy all 5 Tigers. They developed a plan born of desperation and cunning. Tom would take the first shot at dawn, targeting whichever Tiger presented the best opportunity. Simultaneously, Morrison would detonate improvised explosives near the German positions, creating the illusion of an artillery barrage. Wallace would broadcast false radio traffic on captured German equipment, reporting massive American reinforcement and new anti-tank weapons. The goal was not victory, but confusion to make the German commander hesitate, reconsider, perhaps even retreat. Tom spent the remaining hours before dawn refining his scope. He discovered that by adding a thin film of oil to the lenses, he could prevent fogging more effectively than soap. He reinforced the mounting system with wire wrapped so tightly it cut into his hands. He created a better reticle using human hair from his own head stretched across the focal plane in a precise grid pattern. The scope was still ugly, still improvised, but it was now a refined ugly, a functional improvisation. At 0400 hours on February 10th, Tom moved into position with a different team. Rodriguez remained a spotter, but now they were accompanied by Private First Class Danny Thompson, a 17-year-old from Iowa, who volunteered because, as he put it, he wanted to see history happen. They chose a different location, a destroyed church steeple that provided elevation and concealment. The range to the German positions was longer, nearly 1,300 yards, but the angle was better. Through his improved scope, Tom watched the German positions in the pre-dawn darkness. The 2 remaining Tigers from yesterday had indeed been reinforced. 5 massive tanks sat in a defensive line, their guns covering every approach to the pass. But the Germans had learned from yesterday. The auxiliary fuel drums had been removed. Engine hatches remained closed. Crew members stayed inside their vehicles. Rodriguez whispered observations. No external targets. Everything buttoned up. Tom studied each tank carefully, looking for anything, any weakness. Then he saw it. The lead Tiger, probably the command vehicle, had its radio antenna extended a thin metal rod reaching 8 feet above the turret. At the base of the antenna was a small junction box no bigger than a pack of cigarettes. Inside that box were the electrical connections for the radio system. If he could hit it, the command tank would lose communications. It was an almost impossible shot. The target was perhaps 4 inches square at 1,300 yards with a 5-mile-per-hour crosswind and morning thermals beginning to create unpredictable air currents. Tom would need to calculate not just for distance and wind, but for the rising air that could push his bullet off course by feet rather than inches. Thompson whispered, "Movement in the command tank. Hatch opening." Through his scope, Tom saw the commander's cupola crack open. Not fully, just enough for the tank commander to peer out with binoculars scanning the American positions. The German officer was careful, exposing only the top of his head, but he had made one mistake. He was backlit by the rising sun, his silhouette clear against the brightening sky. Tom had a choice. Try for the impossible shot on the radio antenna, or take the easier shot on the commander. The commander was a sure kill, but it would only remove one man. The radio antenna might cripple their coordination, create confusion, make them vulnerable. Tom made his choice. He adjusted his aim for the antenna base, calculating the complex mathematics in his head. 1,300 yards meant approximately 4 seconds of flight time. The bullet would drop nearly 15 feet from its initial trajectory. The wind would push it 6 feet to the right. The morning thermals, impossible to calculate precisely, might add another 2 to 3 feet of deviation. Rodriguez saw where he was aiming. Tom, that is impossible. So was yesterday. Tom found his breathing rhythm settled the crosshairs on a point in empty air, where physics and intuition told him the bullet needed to start its journey. His finger found the trigger. The world narrowed to heartbeats and mathematics. But just as he began to squeeze, disaster struck. The improvised scope mount weakened by yesterday's shot, and the night's modifications began to shift. He could feel it through the stock, a tiny movement, perhaps a thousandth of an inch, but at 1,300 yards that would translate to missing by several feet. Tom stopped, lifted his head, examined the mount. A crucial screw had worked loose, the metal fatigued from recoil stress. Problem, Rodriguez asked. Mount is failing. I need to fix it. We do not have time. The sun is rising. Morrison is ready with the explosives. Everyone is waiting on your shot. Tom made a decision that went against every instinct he had as a precision craftsman. Instead of fixing the mount, he would compensate for its movement. He would calculate not just for distance and wind, but for the mechanical imperfection of his own weapon. It was like trying to repair a watch while wearing boxing gloves, technically possible, but practically insane. He returned to his shooting position, feeling the slight play in the scope mount, measuring it with his fingertips, incorporating it into his calculations. The German commander was still scanning with his binoculars, unaware that 1,300 yards away, a watchmaker was performing mathematics that would make a university professor weep. Tom adjusted his aim to account for the loose mount, adding another 2 feet of compensation to his already complex calculation. He was no longer aiming at a point in space, but at a theoretical position that existed only in his mind, a spot where bullet trajectory, wind drift, thermal rise, and mechanical failure would intersect with a 4-inch metal box. Thompson whispered urgently, "German infantry moving up. Looks like they are preparing to advance." Time had run out. Tom found his breath, felt his heartbeat slow, entered that space between moments where watchmakers live when placing hairsprings and soldiers live when facing death. The crosshairs, made from his own hair, settled on empty air 15 feet above and 8 feet left of the target. He squeezed the trigger with the same pressure he would use to set a watch crown, smooth and inevitable. The rifle fired, the sounds sharp in the morning air. The scope mount shifted exactly as Tom had predicted, throwing his aim off by precisely the amount he had calculated. The bullet flew through 4 seconds of physics and wind, dropping and drifting along its trajectory like a thrown stone, following the only path available to it. Tom watched through his damaged scope as the bullet struck exactly where he had aimed, not where he had aimed the rifle, but where he had aimed in his mind. The antenna junction box exploded in a shower of sparks and metal fragments. The radio antenna toppled sideways, dragging broken cables with it. The German commander, startled by the impact, just inches from his head, dropped down into his turret, slamming the hatch behind him. Immediately, Morrison detonated his explosives, 3 bundles of TNT placed at calculated positions to simulate an artillery strike. The explosions walked across the German positions, throwing dirt and debris but causing no real damage. But combined with the loss of radio communications in the command tank, it created the perfect illusion. Wallace began his radio deception, broadcasting on captured German frequencies. "American artillery has our range, new weapons confirmed, anti-tank guns moving up." His German was flawless, panicked, exactly what a frightened radio operator would sound like. Through his scope, Tom watched the German reaction. The remaining Tigers began to reverse their careful defensive line, dissolving into confusion. Without radio coordination from the command tank, each crew made independent decisions. One Tiger turned too sharply, throwing a track. Another backed into a shell crater, temporarily stuck. The infantry that had been preparing to advance scattered for cover. Rodriguez laughed quietly. They think we have them zeroed. They think that was artillery spotting. But Tom was already planning his next shot. The Tiger with the thrown track was immobilized, its crew climbing out to attempt repairs. The driver emerged first, then the radio operator, both focused on the damaged track assembly. They felt safe, believing the main threat was artillery that would take time to adjust and fire again. Tom shifted his aim to the immobilized Tiger's engine deck. With the crew outside, a fire might spread unchecked. The range was 1,200 yards closer than his previous shot, but the target was smaller, a maintenance panel the size of a briefcase. His scope mount was now dangerously loose, held in place more by wire and hope than proper engineering. He fired without hesitation. The bullet struck the maintenance panel, puncturing the thin armor and penetrating into the engine compartment. No explosion this time, just smoke beginning to seep from the vents. But smoke meant fire, and fire in a tank filled with ammunition meant only one thing. The German crew, seeing smoke, abandoned their repair efforts and ran. 2 shots, 2 disabled Tigers, and the illusion of massive American firepower. The German commander, unable to coordinate by radio, unable to determine the actual threat, made the only decision that seemed logical. He ordered a withdrawal, not a retreat, not a rout, but a tactical withdrawal to reassess the situation. Tom watched through his failing scope as the 3 operational Tigers began to pull back, covering each other's movement, professional even in confusion. The immobilized Tiger smoke had become flame ammunition, beginning to cook off in spectacular fashion. The pass blocked for 3 days by German armor was suddenly open. Colonel Hartley stood at the edge of his command post, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching the impossible unfold. 3 Tiger II tanks, the pride of German armor engineering, were withdrawing from positions they had held for 72 hours. Smoke billowed from 2 destroyed Tigers, their burning hulks testament to what one man with an improvised scope had achieved. The pass to Schönberg lay open like a door suddenly unlocked, and 200 American soldiers, who had been preparing to die now, had a chance to live. All units advance immediately, Hartley commanded into his radio. Move through the pass while they're pulling back. Go, go, go! The attack that followed was not the suicidal charge Hartley had planned, but a coordinated push through the suddenly empty gap. Able Company, led by Lieutenant Chen, sprinted across ground that had been a death trap just minutes before. Baker Company flanked left, Charlie Company flanked right. They moved like water through a broken dam, fast and unstoppable. Tom remained in his position, watching through his deteriorating scope as American soldiers poured through the pass. Rodriguez beside him counted aloud as squads made it through safely. 20, 40, 60 men through. They're making it, Tom. They're actually making it. But Tom saw what others could not yet see. The 3 surviving Tigers were not fleeing in panic. They were conducting a tactical withdrawal, and through his wavering optics, he watched them take new positions on high ground 1,000 yards beyond the pass. Their guns swiveled to target the American soldiers now exposed in the valley below. The first 80mm shell confirmed Tom's fears, exploding among Charlie Company and sending bodies flying. The second struck even closer, cutting down 3 men from Able Company who had stopped to help wounded comrades. The advance stalled as soldiers dove for whatever cover they could find. The pass might be open, but the killing ground had simply moved. Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over a borrowed radio. "Garrett, can you see the Tigers from your position?" Tom swung his rifle, searching through his failing scope. The image was growing worse with each passing minute, the mounting system failing from repeated recoil, the crosshairs made from human hair beginning to sag from heat and moisture. But he could see them, 3 Tigers, positioned in a perfect defensive line, their guns commanding the valley the Americans had to cross. "I see them, sir, but they're at extreme range, maybe 1,400 yards, and my scope is failing. Can you do anything at all?" Tom studied the German positions through his wavering optics. The Tigers had learned from the morning's engagement. They kept hatches closed, no auxiliary fuel visible, maintaining constant movement to avoid becoming static targets. But then Private Thompson, still beside him, noticed something Tom had missed. "Sergeant, look at the tree line behind them." Tom shifted his focus. The Germans had positioned themselves at the edge of a forest, using the trees as concealment from potential air attack. But those trees' pines, heavy with winter snow, created their own vulnerability. The weight of accumulated snow had bent many branches low, some nearly touching the ground. If those branches could be broken, the falling snow might create enough confusion to disrupt German targeting. It was not a military solution. It was a watchmaker's solution, using environmental factors like springs and tensions in a mechanical movement. Tom calculated the angle needed to strike specific branches that would create a cascade effect. He identified 3 critical points where single bullets might trigger avalanches of snow and broken branches. Rodriguez understood immediately. You want to blind them with their own concealment? Not blind them. Distract them. Make them think they're under attack from the forest. Tom's first shot struck a pine branch thick as a man's arm, already stressed from snow weight. The branch cracked, dropped, striking others below it. Snow cascaded down in a white curtain. Through his failing scope, Tom saw the nearest tiger's turret swivel toward the forest, the commander trying to identify the threat. The second shot hit another stressed branch, this one directly above the middle tiger. The falling debris thundered onto the tank's deck, snow obscuring vision blocks and periscopes. The tank lurched backward, the driver momentarily blinded. But it was the third shot that created unexpected magic. Tom aimed for a branch near the command tiger, but his failing scope mount finally gave way completely, throwing his aim off by several feet. The bullet struck not the branch, but a tree trunk that had been damaged by earlier artillery. The impact was enough to topple the entire tree, 40 feet of pine and snow crashing down directly onto the command tiger's rear deck. The tree did not penetrate, the armor could not have, but its weight and entanglement fouled the turret's rotation mechanism. The tiger's main gun, trapped by branches and trunk, could no longer traverse. The most powerful weapon on the battlefield had been neutralized by forestry and failed equipment. The German crews, confused and partially blinded by snow and debris, began firing wildly into the forest. They were convinced American forces had flanked them, that the trees hid infantry with new anti-tank weapons. Their shots were disciplined but directed at ghosts, at movements that were just snow falling from disturbed branches. Wallace, still monitoring German radio frequencies, reported scattered panic. They're calling for infantry support to clear the forest. They think we have a whole company in those trees. Colonel Hartley seized the opportunity. All units advance now, move while they're engaged with the trees. The battalion surged forward again, running through the valley while German guns fired into empty forest. Tom watched through his ruined scope, the image now so distorted he could barely distinguish tanks from trees as 200 Americans sprinted toward safety. But he also saw something else that made his blood run cold. German infantry emerging from concealed positions, moving to intercept the fleeing Americans. At least 50 Wehrmacht soldiers, hidden until now, formed a blocking line with MG-42 machine guns and rifles. They would cut the Americans down before they could reach cover. Tom tried to aim his rifle, but the scope was useless now. The mount completely failed, the lenses knocked out of alignment. He might as well have been looking through a kaleidoscope. Morrison appeared beside him, breathing hard from running. Tom, we have to go. Our position is compromised. The German infantry will slaughter them. There's nothing more you can do. Your scope is finished. Tom pulled the ruined scope from his rifle, held it in his hands like a dead thing. All that work, all that precision reduced to misaligned brass and glass. Then, in a moment of desperate inspiration, he remembered something from his watchmaking days. Sometimes when a watch mechanism failed completely, you could still use individual components for different purposes. A broken mainspring could become a lockpick. A shattered crystal could become a cutting tool. He quickly disassembled the scope, pulling out the objective lens. Holding it up to catch the morning sun, he found the focal point where light concentrated into a burning dot. The lens, designed by Carl Zeiss to gather light for magnification, could also concentrate sunlight into a weapon. Rodriguez, I need something flammable. Anything. Rodriguez pulled out a cloth soaked in gun oil used for cleaning weapons. Tom positioned the lens to focus sunlight onto the cloth, which began to smoke within seconds. He wrapped the burning cloth around a bullet, creating a crude incendiary round. This is insane, Morrison said. Everything about this has been insane. Tom replied, loading the modified round into his rifle. Without a scope, Tom had to rely on iron sights and instinct. The German infantry position was 800 yards away, far beyond accurate iron sight range. But he was not aiming at soldiers. He was aiming at their ammunition supply wooden crates stacked behind their position, visible only because Tom had been watching this battlefield for days and knew where supplies were cached. He fired. The incendiary round flew wild, missing by 20 yards. But Tom was already preparing another Rodriguez, helping him focus sunlight onto more oil-soaked cloth. The second round struck closer, impacting near the German position, but failing to ignite anything. The third round found its mark. The bullet struck a crate of German stick grenades at the burning cloth, igniting the wooden packaging. Within seconds, the fire spread to adjacent ammunition boxes. The German infantry, realizing their supply dump was burning, broke formation. Some ran to fight the fire, others scattered to avoid the impending explosion. When the ammunition detonated, it was not the massive explosion of a Tiger's magazine, but a rolling series of smaller blast grenades and small arms ammunition, cooking off in sequence. The German blocking position dissolved into chaos, soldiers abandoning their weapons to escape the spreading fire and shrapnel. The path was clear. American soldiers streamed through the gap, running past burning German supplies and scattered Wehrmacht troops, too concerned with survival to fight. Tom watched them go, counted them, passing these men who should have died charging Tiger tanks across open ground. But the Germans had one more card to play. From the forest behind the disabled Tigers came a sound Tom recognized with dread, the high-pitched scream of Nebelwerfer rockets. 6 launchers hidden until now fired simultaneously. The rockets arced through the morning sky, their distinctive howl earning them the nickname Screaming Mimes. The barrage landed among the fleeing Americans with devastating effect. Explosions walked across the valley, each rocket dispersing hundreds of fragments. Men Tom had just saved were cut down, their escape becoming a new killing field. The careful plan, the improvised miracles, all threatened to become meaningless in the face of simple, brutal firepower. Chen's voice on the radio was desperate. "We need those Nebelwerfers silenced or we're all dead." Tom looked at his rifle, his ruined scope in pieces, his ammunition nearly exhausted. He had one modified round, left one bullet with burning cloth, wrapped around it already beginning to smoke. The Nebelwerfer position was nearly 1,000 yards away, hidden in forest shadow, impossible to hit with iron sights. Rodriguez grabbed his shoulder. "Tom, you cannot make that shot, not without a scope." But Thompson, the 17-year-old private from Iowa, said something that changed everything. "You don't need to hit them. You just need to make them think you can hit them." Tom understood. He loaded his last incendiary round, aimed not at the Nebelwerfer position, but at the forest canopy above it, where pine trees heavy with snow and dry winter needles created natural ammunition. He elevated his rifle using Kentucky windage in prayer and fired. The burning round disappeared into the tree canopy. For a moment, nothing. Then smoke. The incendiary had lodged in dead branches, starting a crown fire that began spreading through the dry upper reaches of the pines. Burning branches began falling onto the Nebelwerfer position. Snow melted and dropped in sheets, extinguishing some fires, but spreading others. The German rocket crews, faced with fire falling from above, abandoned their launchers. They had no way to know this was one lucky shot rather than coordinated incendiary attack. The forest fire spread with winter wind, driving it toward German lines. What had been concealment became a trap. The surviving Tigers, still entangled with fallen trees, could not easily retreat. German infantry fell back from the advancing flames. In minutes, the entire German defensive position had become untenable. Through smoke and flame, the last American soldiers made it through the pass. Tom counted them until his eyes burned from smoke and exhaustion. 183 men had made it. 17 had died in the final rocket barrage, but 183 lived who should have died charging Tiger tanks at dawn. Chen found Tom later still in his position, still holding his scopeless rifle. The lieutenant looked at the chaos Tom had created: 2 destroyed Tigers, 1 disabled by a tree, a forest fire driving back German forces, the pass to Schönberg open. "How?" Chen asked simply. Tom looked at the pieces of his scope scattered around him. "I'm a watchmaker, sir. I fix things that are broken, and sometimes I break things that need breaking." That evening, as the battalion regrouped with reinforcements from the 45th Infantry Division, Colonel Hartley found Tom cleaning his rifle, the destroyed scope pieces laid out beside him like a watchmaker's exploded diagram. Rodriguez sat nearby, carefully transcribing notes from Tom's worn notebook. Sergeant Garrett, Hartley said, "What you did today goes beyond any commendation I can give. This needs to be documented, studied, taught." Tom looked up from his work. "With respect, sir, it shouldn't be." Hartley frowned. "You saved this entire battalion. I got lucky with a microscope and some wire, sir. If this becomes doctrine, every desperate unit will try to replicate it. Most will fail. Men will die trying to copy something that only worked because of very specific circumstances." Rodriguez understood what Tom was saying. "You want it buried in the reports." Tom nodded, then handed Rodriguez his notebook. "I've written everything down. The calculations, the techniques, all of it. Maybe someday it will help someone, but not as a field manual. As a reminder that innovation comes from desperation and observation, not from following instructions." 5 weeks later, on March 18, 1945, Tom Garrett was setting up an observation post near Frankfurt when a German patrol surprised his position. He held them off long enough for his squad to escape killing 7 enemy soldiers before a stick grenade ended his war. Rodriguez found him later, Tom's rifle still in his hands, iron sights aligned on the trail the Germans had used. Rodriguez brought Tom's notebook back to America, along with a piece of the improvised scope. In 1946, he presented both to instructors at Fort Benning, not as doctrine, but as a case study in battlefield innovation. The lesson derived was not about microscopes or mathematical calculations, but about mindset, the ability to see solutions where others see only problems. Today, the principle Tom demonstrated is taught as field expedient modification in sniper schools worldwide. Instructors don't tell Tom's full story. They simply say that somewhere in Europe, someone proved that the difference between possible and impossible is often just perspective. The students who understand this lesson best are usually the ones who come from practical backgrounds, mechanics and technicians, who understand that every machine can be improved and every problem has a solution hidden within it. Rodriguez died in 2003, taking the full story with him. But his grandson Miguel, an optical engineer, keeps Tom's notebook in a climate-controlled case. On the final page, dated March 17, 1945, Tom wrote, "The scope is just glass and metal arranged properly. The real precision instrument is the human mind focused through necessity and calibrated by the absolute need to keep others alive. In the end, that's the only measurement that matters."